True History of the Oriental Alchemists, Chapter the 8th, beginning with the sign of the planet Venus. An orb atop an equilateral cross. Sacred fire. The appearance of God to mortals seems always to have been in brightness and great glory, whether he was angry or in displeasure, or benign and kind. These appearances are often mentioned in Scripture. When God appeared on Mount Sinai, it is said, "The Lord descended upon it in fire." Exodus 19, verse 18. And when Moses repeats the history of this to the children of Israel, he says, "The Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire." Deuteronomy 4:12. So it was when the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. The bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Exodus 3:3. The appearance of the angel of God's presence, or that divine person who represented God, were always in brightness, or in other words, the Shekinah was always surrounded with glory. This seems to have given occasion to those of old to imagine fire to be what God dwelt in. Ipsi, Darius, solum mitrin, sacrum que et eternum, invocens ignem, ut illis dignam viteri gloris, majorem que monumentis fortitudinem inspirarent, que cultios 1:4, C13. Whether it was that any fire proceeded from God and burnt up the oblation in the first sacrifices, as some ingenious men have conjectured, we know not. It is certain that in after ages this was the case. We are sure that a fire from the Lord consumed upon the altar the burnt offering of Aaron, Leviticus 9:24, and so it did the sacrifice of Gideon, both the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Judges 6:21. When David built an altar unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called upon the Lord, he answered him from heaven by fire, upon the altar of burnt offerings. 1 Chronicles 21:26. The same thing happened at the dedication of Solomon's temple. The fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. 2 Chronicles 7:1. And much about 100 years afterwards, when Elijah made the extraordinary sacrifice in proof that Baal was no god, the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the fire that was in the trench. 1 Kings 18:38. And if we go back long before the times of Moses, as early as Abraham's days, we meet with an instance of the same sort. It came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between these pieces. Genesis 15:17. The first appearances of God, then being in glory or which is the same thing in light or fire, and he showing his acceptance of sacrifices in so many instances by consuming them with fire. Hence it was that the Eastern people, and particularly the Persians, fell into the worship of fire itself, or rather they conceived fire to be the symbol of God's presence, and they worshipped God in or by fire. From the Assyrians or Chaldeans or Persians, this worship was propagated southward among the Egyptians, and westward among the Greeks, and by them it was brought into Italy. The Greeks were wont to meet together to worship in their Prytamia, and there they consulted for the public good. And there was a constant fire kept upon the altar, which was dignified by the name of Vesta by some. The fire itself was properly Vesta, and so Ovid, nec te elud vestam quam vivam intelligere flammam. The Prytania were the atria of the temples, wherein a fire was kept that was never suffered to go out. On the change in architectural forms from the pyramidal or the horizontal to the obeliscad or the upright or vertical, the flames were transferred from the altars of cubes to the summits of the typical uprights or towers. Or to the tops of the candles, such as we see them used now in Catholic worship, and which are called tapers, from their tapering or pyramidal form, and which, wherever they are seen or raised, are supposed always to indicate the divine presence or influence. This through the symbolism that there is in the living light, which is the last exalted show of fluent or inflamed brilliant matter, passing off beyond into the unknown and unseen world of celestial light, or occult fire, to which all the forms of things tend, and in which even idea itself passes from recognition as meaning, and evolves, spiring up as all flame does, to escape to wing away. Vesta, or the fire, was worshipped in circular temples, which were the images or the miniatures of the temple of the world, with its dome or cope of stars. It was in the atria of the temples, and in the presence of and before the above-mentioned lights, that the forms of ceremonial worship were always observed. It is certain that Vesta was worshipped at Troy, and Aeneas brought her into Italy. Manibus vitas, vestamque potentum eternumque aditis effort penetralibus ignem. Aeneid 2296. Numa settled an order of virgin priestesses, whose business and care it was constantly to maintain the holy fire. And long before Numa's days, we find it not only customary, but honorable among the Albans to appoint the best-born virgins to be priestesses of Vesta, and to keep up the constant unextinguished fire. When Virgil speaks, Aeneid 4:200, of Iarbas in Africa as building 100 temples and 100 altars, he says, Vigilemque sacraverat ignem excubias divum Saturnas, that he had consecrated a fire that never went out. And he calls these temples and these lights, or this fire, the perpetual watches, or watch lights, or proof of the presence of the gods, by which expressions he means that places and things were constantly protected and solemnized where such lights burned, and that the celestials or angel defenders camped, as it were, and were sure to be met with thickly. Were these flames upon the altar, and these torches or lights about the temples, invited them and were studiously and incessantly maintained. Thus the custom seems to have been general from the earliest antiquity to maintain a constant fire, as conceiving the gods present there. And this was not only the opinion of the inhabitants of Judea, but it extended all over Persia, Greece, Italy, Egypt, and most of the other nations of the world. Porphyry imagined that the reason why the most ancient mortals kept up a constant, ever-burning fire in honor of the immortal gods was because fire was most like the gods. He says that the ancients kept an unextinguished fire in their temples to the gods because it was most like them. Fire was not like the gods, but it was what they appeared in to mortals. And so the true God always appeared in brightness and glory. Yet no one would say that brightness was most like the true God, but was most like the Shekinah, in which God appeared. And hence the custom arose of keeping up an unextinguished fire in the ancient temples. Vesta is properly an Oriental word, derived from the Hebrew as, fire. Thence the word Astarte in the Phoenician dialect. The signification of the term is the same as the ignis eternus, the perpetual fire itself. They that worshipped either Vesta or Vulcan, or the master power of nature, which is known under those names, were properly fire worshippers. God, then, being wont to appear in fire, and being conceived to dwell in fire, the notion spread universally, and was universally admitted. First, then, it was not at all out of the way to think of engaging in friendship with God by the same means as they contracted friendship with one another. And since they to whom God appeared saw him appear in fire, and they acquainted others with such his appearances, he was conceived to dwell in fire. By degrees, therefore, the world came to be over-curious in the fire that was constantly to be kept up, and in things to be sacrificed. And they proceeded from one step to another, till at length they filled up the measure of their aberration, which was in reality instigated by their zeal, and by their intense desire to mitigate the displeasure of their divinities. For religion was much more intense as a feeling in early days, by passing into dreadful ceremonies in regard to this fire, which they reverenced as the last possible physical form of divinity, not only in its grandeur and power, but also in its purity. It arose from this view that human sacrifices came to be offered to the deities in many parts of the world, particularly in Phoenicia, and in the colonies derived from thence into Africa and other places. In the intensity of their minds, children were sacrificed by their parents. In the intensity of their minds, children were sacrificed by their parents, as being the best and dearest oblation that could be made, and the strongest arguments that nothing ought to be withheld from God. This was expiation for that sad result, the consequence of the original curse, issuing from the fatal curiosity concerning the bitter fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our woe with loss of Eden, according to Milton. That particular natural sense of shame, in all its forms lesser and larger, and with all the references inseparably allied to the propagation, in all its multitudinous cunning, so to speak, wherever the condemned material tissues reach, puzzled the thoughtful ancients as to its meaning. This they consider the convicted adversary, or Lucifer, Lord of light, that is, material light. Eldest son of the morning. Morning indeed, dawning with its light from behind that forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil. What is this shame, urged the philosophers, this reddening, this ruddiness, however good and beautiful, and especially the ornament of the young and inexperienced and of children, who are newest from the real, glowing continents of deity, with the bloom of the first angelic world scarcely yet fading from off their cherub faces, gradually darkening and hardening in the degradation and iniquity of being here as presences in this world, although the most glorious amidst the forms of flesh. What is this shame, which is the characteristic singly of human creatures? All other creatures are sinless in this respect, and know not the feeling of that, correctly looked at, strange thing which men call shame, something which is not right, that the sun even should see, and therefore stirring the blood, and reddening the face, and confusing the speech, and causing man to hang down his head, and to hide himself, as if guilty of something, even as our guilty first parents, having lost the unconsciousness of their childlike, innocent first state, that of sinless virginity, hid themselves and shunned their own light in the umbrage of paradise, all at once convicted to the certainty that they must hide, because they were exposed, in that they had themselves broken that original intention regarding them. Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. That is, the innocent children should come up for salvation, who, though suffering under the mortal liability incurred by all flesh in that first sin, an incident in the first fall, which has empoisoned and cursed all nature, are yet free by the nature of their ungrown possibility, and from their unconsciousness of it, they know not the shame of the condition adult, and therefore they bear not the badge of men, and are not of this world really, but of another world. To recur for a moment to the theory of human sacrifices, which once largely prevailed, interwoven inseparably with the forms of architecture from the earliest times, proofs of which we see constantly in classical buildings particularly, and in the Italian modifications displayed in the cities of Europe, was the habit of exposing as talismans the members and particularly the heads of human sacrifices. This is observable in the innumerable masks, or heads full-faced, placed on the keystones of arches or portals, They are either deified mortals or demigods, sometimes, but very rarely, because it is a sinister palladium. The head of Medusa is seen. Exposure of the heads of criminals on town gates, over bridges, or over arches follows the same idea as raging in the list of protesting, or appealing palladia, which are supposed to possess the same objurgating or propitiating power as the wild, winged creatures, children of the air. Affixed in penitential, magic brand or exposure on the doors of barns or on the outside of rustic buildings. All this is ceremonial sacrifice addressed to the harmful gods and meant occultly and entreatingly for the eyes of the observant but invisible. Wandering angels who move through the world, threading unseen the ways of men, and unwitted of by them, and most abundant and most active there were the mother of all of them is in the ascendant with her influences, or when night is abroad, thrown in her cope of stars, letters from their first judiciary arrangement in the heavens, spelling out continually new astrological combinations, for astrology was the mother, as she was the precursor of astronomy, and was once a power, into whatever mean roads the exercise of the art of her servants has strayed now, in unworthy and indign divination, and in the base proffer of supposed gypsy arts, ministration becomes ridiculous, or made so, which was once mighty and sublime. The pyramidal or triangular form which fire assumes in its ascent to heaven is in the monolithic typology used to signify the great generative power. We have only to look at Stonehenge, Ellora, the Babel Towers of Central America, the gigantic ruins scattered all over Tartary and India, to see how glorious they symbolize the majesty of the Supreme. To these upright obelisks or lithoi of the old world, including the Bethel or Jacob's pillar or pillow raised in the plain of Luz, we will add, as the commemorative or reminding shape of the fire, the pyramids of Egypt, the millenaris, gnomon, metis stone, or mark called London stone, all crosses raised at the junction of four roads, all market crosses, the round towers of Ireland, and in all the changeful aspects of their genealogy, all spires and towers, in their grand hieroglyphic proclamation all over the world. All these are phalli, and express a sublime meaning. The sign of Aries, the sign of Taurus, the sign of Gemini, the sign of Cancer, the sign of Leo, the sign of Virgo are the six first signs, and they collectively, in their annual succession, form the macrocosmos of the Kabbalists. Then succeeds the turning point balances or navel of the astronomical wheel, represented by the sign Libra, which, be it remembered, was added by the imaginative and therefore practically inventive Greeks. The foregoing up to Libra represent the ascending signs, or six of the spokes, so to speak, of the foregoing up to Libra. Again, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo. The foregoing up to Libra represent the ascending signs, or six of the spokes, so to speak, of the annual zodiacal wheel, circling to the zenith or vertex. The last 6 signs of the zodiac are called descending signs. And they are the sinister, autumnal, or changing, in reverse monthly spaces, each of 30 degrees, and again comprising 6 radii of this celestial wheel, or this Ezekiel's wheel. The turning point is Virgo Scorpio, which, until separated in the mythical interpretation from without at the junction point, the turning point is Virgo Scorpio, which, until separated in the mythical interpretation from without at the junction point between ascent and descent, were the same single sign. The latter half or left wing of this grand zodiacal army, or host of heaven, drawn up in battle array, and headed, as by a figure, we shall choose to say by the archangel Michael. The latter half, or left wing of this grand zodiacal army, or host of heaven, drawn up in the battle array, as headed, as by a figure, we shall choose to say by the archangel Michael of Yemen, or the sun, at the center, or in the champion or conquering point, is called by the Kabbalists, and therefore by the Rosicrucians, the abstract microcosmos, in which microcosm, or little world, in opposition to the macrocosm, or great world, is to be found, man, as produced in it from the operations from above, and to be saved in the great sacrifice, the crucifixion act, the phenomena of the being man taking place in the mythic return of the world. All this is incomprehensible, except in the strange mysticism of the Gnostics and the Kabbalists. And the whole theory requires a key of explanation to render it intelligible, which key is only darkly referred to as possible, but refused absolutely by these extraordinary men as not permissible to be disclosed. And they, however, were very fond of diagrams and mystic figures, of which they left many in those rarities, mostly ill executed, but each wonderfully suggestive, called Gnostic gems. We will supply a seeming elucidation of this astrological assumption of what was earliest, for which see the succeeding figure. The sign of Libra, the balances, leads again off as the hinge point, introducing the 6 winter signs, which are the sign of Libra again, the sign of Scorpio, the sign of Sagittarius, the sign of Capricornus, the sign of Aquarius, and the sign of Pisces. Figure 12a is Ezekiel's will. Here you have the first 6 signs ending in Libra, and then the next 6 signs beginning with Libra. Macrocosm ascending. Microcosm descending. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is macrocosm ascending. 7 is the center point. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 is microcosm descending. Turning point Libra. The sign Libra was added by the Greeks. The first 6 signs, or ascending signs, are represented by the celestial perpendicular, or descending ray, as thus: a rectangle, which is actually a prism, so — is figure 13, oriented up and down. The last 6 signs, or descending signs, are represented by the terrestrial ground line, or horizontal, or equatorial symbol, or sigma, as thus: a rectangle, not three-dimensional, going from right to left, is figure 14. The union of these at the intersection of these rays at the junction point or middle point forms the cross, as thus: figure 15 shows an equilateral cross with no lines crossing the center. So effectively a lowercase t, as you would see on a school board. Figure 16, three-dimensional upward and downward rectangle. Figure 17, a rectangle east to west or right to left, not three-dimensional. Figure 18, a circle within a circle. One can argue again, surrounding a sphere. Figure 18, a cross or 4 wedges within a circle. Wedges are known to be wedges by the cross in the center. In figure C, the union of figure 16 and figure 17 forms the cross. Figure 18 is the mundane circle. Figure 19 is the astronomical cross upon the mundane circle. The union of figure 18, figure 17, and figure 16 in this receptive order, one should feel free to draw these if you're curious about what they look like, you won't be too far from the truth, gives the crux ansata, so continual in all the Egyptian sculptures, which mark or sign is also the symbol of the planet Venus, as below. Figure 18, the crux ansata. This is, again, an up and down three-dimensional rectangle met at its apex by 2 isosceles triangles with their hypotenuses aimed upward, their A sides opposite each other, and their B sides touching. And the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Atop which is a circle, which looks very much like an oval mirror. Figure 21, the mark of the planet Venus, is a solid line circle above an equilateral cross. Their origin is thus traced clearly to the same original meaning, which reappear under all sorts of disguises, and are varied in innumerable ingenious ways in all the mythologies, incessantly disclosing and inviting, and as continually evading and escaping discovery. This abstruse mark particularly abounds in the Egyptian temples, where every object and every figure presents it. Its real meaning is, however, intended to be buried in profound darkness. In regard of the mysteries implied in the Christian cross, the schematics contended, first, that Christ, alive upon the cross, humbled himself, usque ad inferni tremenda tormenta, even unto the dreadful torments of hell, pagets catic, Latin 2d, endured for a time those torments, quales reprobi in aeternum censuri sunt, which the reprobate shall everlastingly suffer in hell. Pisc in Luke 12:10. Even despaired of God's mercy, finding God at this time non patrum sed tyranum, not a father but a tyrant, and overcame despair by despair, death by death, hell by hell, and Satan by Satan. Ferus in Math 27. Suffered actually all the torments of hell for our redemption, and descended into the heaviest that hell could yield, endured the torments of hell, the second death, abjection from God, and was made a curse. That is, had the bitter anguish of God's wrath in his soul and body, which is the fire that shall never be quenched. Faith and Doctrine, Thomas Rogers, London, 1629. Jacob Behmen, Behmen, produces some of the most stringent and dark shades in his profound mysticism, although essentially Christian. Note, it is a great mistake to suppose that any of the Egyptian hieroglyphics tell the stories of their religions. There are various series of hieroglyphics, more or less reserved, but the real beliefs of the Egyptian priests were never, indeed they dare not so have been, hazard in the sigma or writing or hieroglyphic of any kind, being forbidden to be spoken, still more written. Consequently, all supposed readings of hieroglyphics are guesswork only, implying earnest and plausible but mistaken effort. Chapter the 9th, Fire Theosophy and the Persians. The fire philosophers, or philosophi per ignem, were a fanatical sect of philosophers who appeared toward the close of the 16th century. They made a figure in almost all the countries of Europe. They declared that the intimate essences of natural things were only to be known by the trying efforts of fire, directed in a chemical process. The Theosophists also insisted that human reason was a dangerous and deceitful guide, that no real progress could be made in knowing, that no real progress could be made in knowledge or in religion by it. Again, the Theosophists also insisted that human reason was a dangerous and deceitful guide, that no real progress could be made in knowledge or in religion by it, and that to all vital, that is, supernatural, purpose it was a vain thing. They thought that divine and supernatural illumination was the only means of arriving at truth. Their name of Paracelsus was derived from Paracelsus, the eminent physician and chemist who was the chief ornament of this extraordinary sect. In England, Robert Fludd, or Flood, F-L-U-D-D, Dutch spelling, I believe, was the great advocate and exponent. Riviere, who wronged in France, Severinus, an author in Denmark, Kunrath, an eminent physician of Dresden, and Daniel Hoffmann, professor of divinity in the University of Helmstedt, have also treated largely on Paracelsus and on his system. Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Paracelsus was born in 1493 at Einsiedeln, a small town of the canton of Schwyz, distant some leagues from Zurich. Having passed a troubled, migratory, and changeful life, this great chemist and very original thinker died on the 24th of September, 1541, Ervoga, in the hospital of St. Stephen, in the 48th year of his age. His works may be enumerated as follows. 1. The German editions, Basel, 1575, in 8 volumes. IB 1, 1589 to 90, in 10 volumes, 4 tomes, and Strasbourg, 1603 to 18, in 4 volumes, folio. 2. The Latin editions, Opera Omnia Medico Chimico Chirurgica, Frankfurt, 1603, in 10 volumes, 4 tomes, and Geneva, 1658, in 3 volumes, folio 3. The French editions, La Grande Chirurgie de Paracelsi, Lyons, 1593 and 1603, in 4 tomes, and Montbéliard, 1608, in 8 volumes. C. Adelung, Histoire de la Folie Humaine, tome 7, Biographie Universelle, article Paracelsi, and Springel, Histoire pragmatique de la médecine, tome 3. Akin to the school of the ancient fire believers and of the magneticists, of a later period, says learned Dr. Ine Moser in his History of Magic, most ably rendered into English by William Howitt, of the same cast as these spectaculars and searchers into the mysteries of nature, drawing from the same well as the Theosophists of the 16th and 17th centuries, these practiced chemistry, by which they asserted that they could explore the profoundest secrets of nature, as they strove above all earthly knowledge after the divine and sought the divine light and fire, through which all men can acquire the true wisdom. They were called the fire philosophers, philosophie per ignem. The most distinguished of these are Theophrastus, Paracelsus, Adam von Boden, Oswald Kroll, and later Valentine Weigel, Robert Flood or Flood, Jacob Bowman, Peter Poré, and company. Under this head, we may also refer to the medical surgical essays of Himman, published at Berlin in 1778, and Pfaff's Astrology. As a great general principle, the Theosophists called the soul a fire taken from the eternal ocean of light. In regard to the supernatural, using the word in its widest sense, it may be said that all the difficulty in admitting the strange things told us lies in the non-administration of an internal causal world as absolutely real. It is said in intellectually admitting, because the influence of the arts proves that men's feelings always have admitted and do still admit this reality. The Platonic philosophy of vision is that it is the view of objects really existing in interior light, which assume form not according to arbitrary laws, but according to the state of mind. This interior light, if we understand Plato, unites with exterior light in the eye, and is thus drawn into a sensual or imaginative activity. But when the outward light is separated, it reposes in its own serene atmosphere. It is then in this state an interior repose that the usual class of religious, or what are called inspired visions, occur. It is the same light of eternity so frequently alluded to in books that treat of mysterious subjects, the light revealed to Pymander, Zoroaster, and all the sages of the East, as the emanation of the spiritual sun, Apollo. Bowman writes of it in his divine vision of contemplation, and Molinus in his spiritual guide, whose work is the ground of quietism, quietism being the foundation of the religion of the people called Friends or Quakers, as also of other mystic or meditative sects. We enlarge from a very learned, candid, and instructive book upon the occult sciences. Regard fire, then, with other eyes than those with those soulless and curious ones with which thou hast looked upon it as the most ordinary thing. Thou hast forgotten what it is, or rather thou hast never known. Chemists are silent about it, or may we not say that it is too loud for them. Chemists are silent about it, or may we say that it is too loud for them. Therefore shall they speak fearfully of it in whispers. Philosophers talk of it as anatomists discourse of the constituents or the parts of the human body. As a piece of mechanism, wondrous though it be, such the wheels of the clock say they in their ingenious expounding of the whys and the wherefores and the mechanics of the mathematics of this mysterious thing with a supernatural soul in it, called world. Such is the chain, such are the balances, such the larger and the smaller mechanical forces, such the time blood, as it were, that is sent circulating through it. Such is the striking with an infinity of bells. It is made for man, this world, and it is greatly like him that is mean, they would add, and they do think it, if they dare add their thinkings. But is this all? Is this the sum of that casketed lamp of the human body, thine own body, thou unthinking world's machine, thou man? Or in the fabric of this clay lamp, lacquered in thy man's imperial splendor, burneth there not a light? Describe that, ye doctors of physics. Unwind the starry limbs of that phenomenon, yea, heavy-browed, doctorial wielders of the scalpel. Useful, however, as ye be in that upholstery warehouse of nature, to which bodies and their make be referred by the materialist as the godless origin of everything. Touch at its heart, ye dissectors of fibers, and of valves, of sinews, and of leaves, hand perchance, of the vein work of the muscles as bark into gamut, of the trunk, split and pare as with steel tools and wedge, this portent, this tree, human though it be, round which ye cluster to examine, about which ye gather with your persuasions to win into the innermost secret of. Cyclops, one-eyed, and savage break into meaning this portent, man, on your science wills. Note the goings of the fire, as he creepeth, serpentineth, riseth, slinketh, broadeneth. Note him reddening, glowing, whitening. Tremble at his face dilating, at the means that is growing into it, to you. See that spark from the blacksmith's anvil, struck as an insect out of a sky containing a whole cloud of such rare locusts, of which Pharaoh and the cities of the plain read of old the secret. 1, 2, 3 sparks, dozens come. Faster and faster the fiery squadrons follow, until in a short while a whole possible army of that hungry thing for battle, for food, for it, fire, glances up, but is soon worn in again, lest acres should glow in the growing advance. Think that this thing is bound as in matter chains. Think that he is outside of all things, and deep in the inside of all things, and that thou in thy world art only the thing between, and that outside and inside are both identical. Couldst thou understand the supernatural truths? Reverence fire for its meaning, and tremble at it. Though in the earth it be chained, and the foot of the archangel Michael, like upon the dragon, be upon it, avert the face from it, as the Magi turned, dreading, and as the symbol before it bowed askance. So much for this great thing, fire. Observe the multiform shapes of fire, the name wreaths that spires. Observe the multiform shapes of fire, the name wreaths, the spires, the stars, the spots, the cascades, and the mighty falls of it. Where the roar, when it grows high in imperial masterdom, is as that of Niagara. Think what it can do, what it is. Watch the trail of sparks struck as in that spouting arch from the metal shoes of the trampling horse. It is as a letter of the great alphabet. The familiar London streets even can give thee the Persian's God, though in thy pleasures and in thy commerce operations thou so oft forgettest thine own God. Whence liberated are those sparks, as stars afar off of a whole sky aflame? Sparks deep down in possibility, though close to us, great in their meaning, though small in their show, as distant single ships of whole fiery fleets. Animate children of, in thy human conception, a dreadful, but in reality a great world of which thou knowest nothing. They fall, foodless, on the rejecting barren, and on the outside the coldest stone. But in each stone, flinty and chilly as the outside is a heart of fire, to strike at which is to bid gush forth the waters, as it were, of very fire, like waters of the rock. Truly, out of sparks can be displayed a whole acreage of fireworks. Forests can be conceived of flame palaces of the fire. Grandest things, soul things, last things, all things. Wonder no longer, then, if rejected so long as an idolatry, the ancient Persians and their masters the Magi, concluding that they saw all in this supernaturally magnificent element, fell down and worshipped it, making of it the visible representation of the very truest, but yet in man's speculation and in his philosophies, nay, in his commonest reason, impossible God. God being everywhere and in us, and indeed us, in the God-lighted man, and impossible to be contemplated or known outside, being all. Lights and flames and the torches, as it were of fire, all fire in this world, the last background on which all things are painted, may be considered as lancets of another world, the last world, circles enclosed by the thick walls, which however by the fire are kept from closing. Of this world, as fire waves and brandishes, will the walls of this world wave, and as it were undulate from about it, in smoke and disruption or combustion of matter, we witness a phenomenon of the burning as of the edges of the matter rings of this world, in which world is fire like a spot, that dense and hard thing, matter holding it in. Oxygen, which is the finest of air and is the means of the quickest burning out, or the supernatural in this world, exhilaration of animal life, or extenuation of the solid. And above all, the heightening of the capacity of the human, as being the quintessence of matter. This oxygen is the thing which feeds fire the most overwhelming. Nor would the specks and spots and stars of fire stop in this dense world medium, in this tissue or sea of things. Could it farther and farther fasten upon the devourer? Could it farther and farther fasten upon and devour the solids, eating as it were through them? But as this thick world is a thing the thickest, it presses out, thrusts, or gravitates upon, and stifles in its too great weight, and conquers not only the liveliest, subtlest, thinnest element of the solids, the finest air, by whatever chemical name, oxygen, azote, ozone, or what not, it may be called, which in fact is merely the nomenclature of its composition. O3. The naming of the ingredients which make the thing, but not the thing. The denseness of the world not only conquers this, we repeat, but so to figure it, matter stamps upon, effaces, and treads out fire, which else would burn on, back as in the beginning of things, or into itself, consuming as in its great revenge of anything being created other than it. All the mighty worlds which in creation were permitted out of it. This is the teaching of the ancient fire philosophers, re-established and restored to the days of comprehension of them, in the conclusions of the Rosicrucians, or Illuminati of later times, who claim to have discovered the eternal fire, or to have found out God in the immortal light. Anno. There are all grades or gradations of the density of matter, but it all coheres by the one law of gravitation. Now, this gravitation is mistaken for a force of itself, when it is nothing but the sympathy or the taking away of the supposed thing between two other things. It is sympathy or appetite seeking its food, or as the closing together of the two like things. It is not because one mass of matter is more ponderable or attracting than another, out of our senses and in reality, but that they are the same with different amounts of affection, and that like seeks like, not recognizing or knowing that between. Now, this thing which is, as it were, slipped between, and which we strike into show of itself, or into fire surprised and driven out of its ambush, is fire. It is as the letter by which matter spells itself out, so to speak. Now, matter is only to be finally forced asunder by heat, flame being the bright, subtle something which comes last, and is the expansion, fruit, crown, or glory of heat. It is the vivid, invisible soul, essence, and spirit of heat, the last evolvement before rendering, the last evolvement before rending, and before the forcible closing again of all the center speeding weights, or desires of matter. Flame is as the expanding out or even exploding flower to this growing thing, heat. It is as the bubble of it, the fruit to which before we have likened it, or seed in the outside hand upon it. Given the supernatural flora, heat is as the gorgeous plant, and flame the glorying flower, and as growth is greater out of the greater matrix, or matter of growing, so the thicker the material of fire, as we may roughly figure it, though we hope we shall be understood, so the stronger shall the fire be. And of necessity, the fiercer will it be perceived to be, resulting being according to power. Thus we get more of fire, that is, heat, out of the hard things, there being more of the thing fire in them. Trituration, mechanical division, multiplication, cutting up, precipitating, or compounding are states into which the forces outside can place matter without searching into and securing its bond and gathering up into hand off it, its chains, and mastering it. These changes can be wrought in matter, and, as it were, it can be taken in pieces, and all this dissolution of it may be effected without our getting, as at the fire blood of our subject. But fire disjoints, as it were, all the hinges of the house, laps out the coherence of it, sets ablaze the dense thing, matter, makes the dark metals run like waters of light, conjures the black devils out of the minerals, and, to our astonishment, shows them much libeled, blinding, angel white. By fire we can lay our hand upon the solids, part them, powder them, melt them, fine them, drive them out to more and more delicate and impalpable texture, firing their invisible molecules or imponderables into cloud, into mist, into gas, out of touch, into hearing, out of hearing, into seeing, out of seeing, into smelling, out of smelling, into nothing, into real nothing, not even into the last blue sky. These are the potent operations of fire, the crucible into which we can cast all the worlds, and find them in their last evolution, not even smoke. These are physical and scientific facts, which there can be no gainsaying, which were seen and found out long ago, ages ago, in the reveries first, and then in the practice of the great magnetists, and those who were called the fire philosophers, of whom we have spoken before. What is that mysterious and inscrutable operation, the striking fire from flint? Familiar as it is, who remarks it? Where, in that hardest, closest pressing together of matter, where the granulation compresses, shining even in its hardness, into the solidest laments of cold, darkest blue, and streaky core like agate resembling white, lie in seeds of fire, spiritual flame seeds to the so stony fruit. In what folds of the flint, in the block of its in, what invisible recess, speckled and spotted in what tissue, crouch the fire sparks, to issue in showers on the stroke of iron, on the so sudden clattering, as of the crowbars of man, on its stony doors, stone caving the thing fire, unseen as its sepulchre. Stroke warning the magical thing forth, whence comes that trail of fire from the cold bosom of the hard secret unexploding flint. Children as from what hard rocky breast, yet hiding its so sacred, sudden fire birth. Who and what science philosopher can explain this wondrous darting forth of the hidden something, which he shall try in vain to arrest, but which like a spirit escapes him? If we ask what fire is, of the men of science they are at fault. They will tell us that it is a phenomenon, that their vocabularies can give no further account of it. They will explain to us that all that can be said of it is that it is a last affection of matter, to the result of which in the world of man they can only testify. But of whose coming and whose going, and of the place from which it comes, and the whereabouts to which it goeth, they are entirely ignorant, and would give a world to know. The foregoing, however feebly expressed, are the views of the famous Rosicrucians. Respecting the nature of this supposed familiar, but yet puzzling thing, fire, we will proceed to some of their further mystic reveries. They are very singular, but the consideration of these is exceedingly abstract and difficult. The whole subject is abstruse in the highest degree. Note, in regard to the singular name of the Rosicrucians, it may be here stated that the chemists, according to their arcana, derive the do from the Latin Ros, and in the figure of the cross, parentheses plus sign, they trace the three letters which compose the word lux, light. Moshem is positive as to the accuracy of this information.